Hello guys, now we are on the second game in the series of the attack on the king. So the game is played between Alikane and Jana in Zurich 1934. It's a Ruy Lopez delayed Steinitz variation, and the game goes e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, d6 castles, knight f6, c3, bishop d7, and d4, bishop e7, and d5, knight b8, and bishop to c2, bishop g4, and c4, knight bd7, and h3, bishop h5, knight to c knight to c3, knight to c3, and castle shot, and g4, bishop g6, queen to e2. White has brought his kingside pawns forward, thereby making room for the effective posting of his attacking units. Thus, after bishop d2 and king g2, white can move his rooks to h1 and g1. Black has no such opportunities, one of the reasons being that the bishop at g6 stands in the way. It follows that the white position deserves preference unless black finds some way of developing an active defense. His only chance is h5, which however does not seem to work because of knight h4 exchanging knight for bishop and weakening black's formation. And if at all after knight h4, if bishop h7 is played and then loses a pawn after g5, and the well-known combination of bishop takes e4. Here I will show the variation. If after h5, now knight to h4 and bishop to h7, it will lose a pawn after g4, and I mean g5 after uh, bishop takes e4. Now knight takes e4 and knight takes e4, queen takes e4 due to the mating threat. And he can black can after h4, I mean h5, knight to h4, now hg4, and hg4 and knight to h7, and knight takes g6, f takes g6. Now bishop to, I mean f takes g6. Now f3 and bishop to g5, and uh, and if at all f4 is played, then e takes f4, and after bishop takes f4, now black plays bishop f6 and controls e5, if at all knight h7, if at all white plays knight to f5, then bishop to g5 is also unsatisfactory for white. Uh, Here after king g2 and bishop takes c1, rook a takes c1 and queen to g5 and rook to h1 and bishop takes f5 and e takes f5, now g6. This is how the game goes. So I showed this variation because in this both the variations black gains the control of number of dark squares when the white pawn complex loses its elasticity and bishop at c2 is out of action. So but black didn't play h5 here, he played knight e8. Now white played bishop to d2 and h6 by black, and this is a weakening move which in view of black's passive policy must ultimately mean trouble for bishop and help white's attack. Therefore the active continuation of h5 is still preferable. And here instead of h6, if h5, then knight to d1, knight e f6. In this case black, although lost at tempi, he has some counter chances. Sorry. So after h6, white plays king to g2, bishop h7, rook h1 and g5. This enables white to open h file at a moment of his choosing, but in fact the consequences of white's h4 and eventually g5 uh, after some preparatory moves would have been no less serious. Now h4, f6, knight d1, rook f7, knight to e3, knight to f8. Black wants to bring his knight to f4 via g6. Now knight f5, bishop takes f5. Now g f5 and rook h7 and rook a g1, knight g7 and king f1. Now queen e8. This enables a knight to reach f4 after all. Now knight to h2. Now knight to h5 and knight to g4, knight f4. Now queen to f3. Uh, Beautifully queen. So then threatening to win beautifully. Here there is a threat of a queen sacrifice after black's move. Here the computer shows this line. So then, and if at all some other move is made, some random move, there is bishop takes f4. After bishop takes f4, e takes f4, and now queen takes f4. After g takes f4, there is knight takes h5. I mean h6. And now, if at all king is, there is the mate here. So this would have been a beautiful queen sacrifice. So then after queen to f3, now king g7, king g7, and hg5, hg5, rook takes h7, knight takes h7, and rook h1. By simple means, white has gained the control of the h file. So now king to h8, rook h6, queen f7, rook bishop d1, and rook g8. And guys, I want to make a point here, like this, when attacking the king, the control of the h file should not be given to white whenever there is an attack on the king side. On the king, the control of the h file is a very important thing, so it must not be given to your opponent. And after rook g8, now queen to b3. This move is instructive and particularly strong. The attacker must never ignore the possibility of some deflecting maneuvers. Here, for instance, unless the black rook returns in time, the white queen will penetrate black's position, winning some pawns. Now queen, now b6. Here, if at all rook to b8, then bishop takes f4, and g takes f4. After g takes f4, there can be queen h3 to follow, and queen h3, or even rook g6 can be played, or better is queen h3. But in the game, black played b6. Now queen to a4. There is a double threat of queen takes a6 and queen d7. So bishop to f8. Now queen takes a6, bishop takes h6, knight takes h6, queen g7. Note how important it is for white, that is bishop at d1 prevents the black queen from reaching h5. Knight takes g8, king takes g8, queen c8 check, and knight f8, and bishop takes f4. Finally, this last outpost is eliminated, and at a time when black cannot take advantage of the open files resulting from this exchange. Now e takes f4. If at all g takes f4, there is simply white puts bishop to f3, or even queen d8 as indicated by the engine. Now he can white can simply push his a and b pawns. Now after e takes f4, queen to e8, and g4. Black's last chance, which cannot be underestimated. Now queen h5, f3, bishop a4, knight h7, and bishop c2, knight f8, e5. White was faced with difficult problems because his bishop could develop little activity, but this move removes all obstacles. Here black played d takes e5, and he pushed d6, and now if at all f takes is played, then f6, queen takes f6, and queen takes g4, king to f7, and bishop to e4. After d takes e5 and d6, and now c takes, here c takes d6. After c takes d6, there will be c5, and bc5, and there will be bishop b3 check. So if at all this is played, then bishop be played, and so then the game, and the game actually c5 was played. Now bishop e4, queen d7, and queen to h6, knight h7, and bishop d5. So guys, so the whole plan of the game is the effective arrangement of the forces like rooks at g1 and h1 and at knight at f5 and at also g4 and bishop at d1 and careful preparation of opening up lines of attack like after h takes g5 and also like some counter moves like queen b3. White's attack was made possible by black's passive policy and helped by the unfortunate position of his light squared bishop. Without the presence of this bishop at g6, it would have been far more difficult for white to secure an open file for his attack. This problem is much evident in some important variations of Ruy Lopez. We will be looking at another example in the next game. Thank you all.